The morning sun barely peeked over the city buildings as John made his way to the courthouse. He clutched the traffic ticket in his hand, a small piece of paper that felt much heavier than it looked. It was for a minor infraction, something about a rolling stop, but it still made his stomach flutter with a mix of nerves and annoyance. He preferred to be in his chambers, reviewing cases, not dealing with one himself. Today, however, he was simply John, a citizen with a court date. He had dressed simply in a dark blazer and slacks, wanting to blend in, not draw attention. Even though he was usually the one presiding over such matters, today he was on the other side of the bench. The thought made him smile faintly. It was good to see things from a different angle sometimes, to remember what it felt like to be the one waiting, the one hoping for a fair outcome. He took a deep breath, pushing down the slight anxiety. He was ready to face whatever came, ready to explain his side of the story, just like anyone else. The heavy courthouse doors loomed ahead, a gateway to another ordinary day, or so he thought. Stepping through the grand doors, John found himself in the main hall, a buzzing hive of activity. He followed the signs, his footsteps echoing on the polished floors until he reached courtroom 3B. The heavy oak door creaked open, revealing a room already packed with people. The air was thick with quiet murmurs, shuffling feet, and the rustle of papers. Every seat seemed taken, save for a few scattered here and there. He scanned the room, noticing the diverse faces, young and old, worried and bored. He saw families huddled together, lawyers whispering to clients, and several police officers standing near the front. Wanting to be inconspicuous, John carefully made his way past the rows of benches. He moved slowly, trying not to disturb anyone, until he spotted an empty seat tucked away in the very last row, near the back wall. It offered a good view of the entire room, including the judge's bench which was currently empty. He settled into the hard wooden bench, pulling his blazer straight. From this spot, he could observe everything without being too noticeable, just as he preferred. He watched the clock tick, waiting for the proceedings to begin, feeling like a small part of a much larger, busy machine. As John settled into his seat, his eyes drifted towards the front of the courtroom. Near the witness stand, standing tall and unmoving, was a police officer. His uniform was pressed perfectly, his hat worn with an air of authority. This was Officer Miller, John noted, recognizing the name from various court dockets he'd overseen. Officer Miller's face was set in a stern expression, his eyes scanning the room with a serious gaze that missed nothing. He had a reputation for being strict, by the book, and not one to tolerate any nonsense in his presence. He stood like a statue, a silent guardian of order, his arms crossed over his chest. His posture alone seemed to tell everyone in the room to behave. John watched him for a moment, observing the way Officer Miller's eyes darted from one person to another, making sure no one stepped out of line. It was clear that this officer took his job very seriously. He was there to keep everything calm and orderly, and he looked ready to act if anyone dared to disrupt the peace. John felt a familiar sense of the weight of authority, even from his quiet corner. He knew Officer Miller was just doing his job, but his stern presence added to the already formal atmosphere of the courtroom. Time slowly ticked by, and the courtroom remained in a holding pattern. John glanced at his watch, the proceedings were running late. He had a busy day ahead, filled with important meetings after this minor court appearance. He needed to know if there was a new estimated start time or if his case might be called later. There was no clerk visible to ask, and the only person who seemed to be in charge of information was the stern Officer Miller. Taking a deep breath, John decided he needed to approach the officer. He stood up from his seat, making sure his movements were slow and respectful. He didn't want to draw any undue attention or seem like he was causing a fuss. With a polite and calm demeanor, he began to walk towards the front of the room where Officer Miller stood. Each step felt a little heavier, a slight tension building in the air. He planned to ask his question quietly, keeping his voice low so as not to disturb the others. As he got closer, he tried to catch Officer Miller's eye, ready to offer a small, respectful nod before speaking. He just needed a quick piece of information to help him manage his day. John was just a few steps away from Officer Miller, about to open his mouth and politely ask about the schedule. He had a small, hopeful question forming on his lips. But before he could even utter a single word, Officer Miller's eyes, which had been scanning the room, suddenly snapped to John. There was no warning, no spoken command. In a flash, Officer Miller's hand shot out. He roughly pushed John back with a strong shove to his chest, making John stumble a step. Then, without a moment's pause, the officer's hand came down hard on John's arm with a loud slap. "Hold it right there." Officer Miller barked, his voice sharp and angry, cutting through the quiet hum of the courtroom. "Can't you see I'm busy? Go sit down and wait your turn." The force of the push and the slap surprised John. A sharp sting flared on his arm, and a wave of shock washed over him. He hadn't expected such a harsh reaction, especially not when he was trying to be polite. He stood frozen for a second, his mouth slightly open, the unspoken question dying on his tongue. The officer's face was still stern, but now it held a hint of aggression. The sting on John's arm pulsed, mirroring the sudden thud in his chest. He felt a rush of heat, a mixture of anger and deep surprise. Being a judge, he was used to respect, to calm and orderly interactions. This rough treatment was completely out of line, especially in a courtroom. His mind raced, processing the unfairness, the disrespect. However, years of experience on the bench had taught him the value of composure. He knew that reacting with anger would only make things worse, especially for a black man in a public space like this. He took a slow, deep breath, forcing himself to calm the fire that had ignited inside him. He clenched his fists at his sides, then slowly relaxed them. His jaw tightened, but he kept his expression as neutral as possible. He didn't want to give Officer Miller any reason to escalate the situation further. He simply nodded, a small, controlled movement, and turned to walk back towards his seat in the back row. Every step felt heavy, but he walked steadily, his head held high. He could feel the eyes of the other people in the courtroom on him, and he knew they had witnessed what happened. He just wanted to disappear back into his seat and wait for the true proceedings to begin. Making a scene was the last thing he desired. The sharp crack of Officer Miller's hand on John's arm, followed by the officer's angry words, had an instant and powerful effect. The low hum of conversations, the rustle of papers, the soft coughs, all faded away in a single, sudden wave. The entire courtroom fell silent, as if a switch had been flipped. The quiet was so deep it felt heavy, almost suffocating. Every single head in the room, from the lawyers at the tables to the people in the back rows, turned towards the scene at the front. Eyes widened, some in shock, some in disbelief, others in open disapproval. All gazes were fixed on Officer Miller, still standing stiffly, and on John, who was slowly making his way back to his seat. The air crackled with unspoken questions and uneasy tension. It was clear that everyone had seen what happened. The abrupt silence amplified the awkwardness, making the few steps John took back to his bench feel like an endless journey under 100 watchful eyes. No one dared to speak, no one dared to move. The usual courthouse buzz had vanished, replaced by a collective, stunned silence, all focused on the two men at the center of the unexpected drama. The heavy silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken judgment. Officer Miller, still puffed up with his own authority, stood firm, seemingly unfazed by the sudden hush. He still looked stern, though a faint hint of confusion might have crossed his face as he noticed the intense stares. Suddenly, a side door near the judge's bench swung open quietly, and a court clerk hurried out. She was a young woman, usually calm and efficient, but now her movements were quick and frantic. Her eyes darted from the empty judge's seat to John, who was now seated again, and then to Officer Miller. Without making a sound that would break the strange quiet, she quickly made her way over to the officer. She reached him, her face serious, and leaned in close. Her lips moved rapidly as she whispered something urgently into Officer Miller's ear, her words too soft to be heard by anyone else in the room. The urgency in her body language, however, was plain for all to see. The clerk's hurried actions and the secret whisper seemed to cut through the quiet, adding a new layer of mystery to the already tense situation. Everyone watched, wondering what important message she was delivering. As the clerk whispered her urgent message, Officer Miller's stern expression slowly began to crumble. At first, his brow furrowed in confusion, then a flicker of understanding, and finally, a dawning horror spread across his features. His eyes, which had been so sharp and authoritative, widened slightly, losing their hard edge. A deep flush started at his neck, creeping quickly upwards. His cheeks, then his entire face, turned a fiery shade of red, like a beacon in the quiet room. It wasn't the red of anger, but the unmistakable color of deep embarrassment and sudden, terrible realization. His mouth, which had been set in a firm line, parted slightly, as if he wanted to speak but no words would come. His shoulders, previously squared with confidence, seemed to slump just a fraction. The confident posture he had held just moments before evaporated, replaced by a rigid stillness that spoke of utter shock. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, or perhaps, had just made the biggest mistake of his entire career. The whispered words from the clerk had clearly hit him like a thunderbolt, and the full weight of his actions crashed down on him. Officer Miller stood frozen, his face a painful shade of crimson, the realization of his blunder hitting him hard. The clerk stepped back from him, her own face now a mix of worry and formality. She turned swiftly to face the courtroom, her voice, which had been a hurried whisper just moments before, now rang out clear and strong, echoing in the hushed space. "All rise," she announced, her voice carrying a weight of authority that commanded instant obedience. "All rise for the Honorable Chief Judge John Smith." The words hung in the air, creating a ripple of confusion and then a wave of understanding throughout the room. People who had been sitting quickly scrambled to their feet, some looking around in bewilderment, trying to figure out where the judge would enter from. Their eyes darted towards the empty judge's bench, then back to the side door. But the clerk's gaze was not on the bench or the door. It was fixed directly on John, sitting quietly in the back row. The revelation was sudden and absolute, making the room hold its breath. The name John Smith had just been spoken, and everyone knew that was the John in the back. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom as the clerk's announcement sank in. All eyes, which had been darting around, now snapped to John in the back row. He rose slowly from his seat, his movements calm and deliberate, despite the stunned silence and the lingering sting on his arm. There was no rush, no sudden burst of anger from him, just a quiet dignity. He began his walk towards the front, a long path that now felt heavy with meaning. Each step he took was observed by every single person in the room. He walked past the rows of standing people, past the lawyers, past the stunned Officer Miller who was still frozen in his spot, his face a mask of absolute horror. John didn't look at the officer directly, his gaze steady and forward. As he reached the elevated judge's bench, he ascended the few steps with practiced ease. He then turned, facing the now completely silent and standing courtroom, and with a soft rustle of his blazer, he settled into the large, padded chair. The chief judge had taken his seat. The transformation from a quiet man in the back to the powerful figure on the bench was complete, leaving the entire room in a state of profound shock. Officer Miller remained rooted to his spot near the witness stand, a statue of pure, unadulterated horror. His face, still burning crimson, was now also pale in patches, a sickly blotchy red. His jaw hung slightly open, and his eyes were wide, fixed on the figure now seated firmly on the judge's bench. The man he had just pushed, verbally chastised, and slapped was not just some random person trying to cut in line. He was the chief judge. The full weight of his actions crashed down on him with crushing force. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a catastrophic blunder. He, Officer Miller, the strict, by-the-book officer, had laid hands on the highest judicial authority in the building. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead, despite the warm air in the room. His mind raced, replaying the entire incident, John's polite approach, his own aggressive reaction, the loud slap, the angry words. Each memory was a hammer blow to his gut. His hands, which had been so quick to act, now felt weak and useless. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on him, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from Judge Smith. His career, his reputation, everything felt like it was crumbling around him in that one terrible moment of realization. He was completely stunned, a deer caught in headlights, utterly lost. From his high seat, Chief Judge John Smith looked out over the stunned courtroom. His eyes, calm and steady, slowly turned towards Officer Miller. There was no anger burning in them, no immediate wrath, only a quiet, deep understanding. This calm gaze, however, felt far more powerful than any shout could have been. Officer Miller, still standing rigidly, felt Judge Smith's eyes on him like a physical weight. The color had drained from his face entirely, leaving him pale and sickly. A visible tremor began in his hands, then spread through his entire body. His knees felt weak, and he swallowed hard, a dry, rasping sound in the intense silence. He was shaking, not just from the shock, but from a profound, chilling fear. He knew the strict rules of the court, the respect owed to a judge, and he had broken them in the most public and disrespectful way possible. Every fiber of his being screamed that his career, perhaps even his freedom, was in serious jeopardy. He couldn't meet Judge Smith's calm, unwavering stare, instead focusing on a spot on the floor just beyond the judge's bench, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Judge Smith, seated high on the bench, finally broke the silence. His voice was not loud or angry, but clear and firm, filling every corner of the room. He spoke directly to Officer Miller, his eyes holding the officer's terrified gaze. "Officer Miller," Judge Smith began, his voice calm, "you are here to uphold the law and maintain order. That includes treating every person who enters this courtroom, or any public space, with respect and dignity." He paused, letting his words sink in. Whether they are a lawyer, a witness, a defendant, or simply a member of the public seeking information, every individual deserves to be treated with courtesy. Their position, their appearance, or their reason for being here does not change their fundamental right to respectful interaction. Officer Miller stood trembling, his head bowed slightly, unable to look up. He felt the weight of every word, knowing they were meant for him, and that the judge was not just speaking to him, but teaching a lesson to everyone present. The judge's words were a gentle, yet powerful, reminder of the core values that should guide all public servants. Judge Smith's words hung in the air, a clear mirror reflecting Officer Miller's actions. The officer's face was still pale, but a new resolve, born of deep shame, began to set in. He took a shaky breath, his shoulders still slumped, and slowly lifted his head to face the judge. "Your Honor," Officer Miller's voice was barely a whisper at first, thick with emotion, but he forced himself to speak louder, to be heard by everyone. "Your Honor, I am truly sorry. I made a grave error in judgment. There is no excuse for my behavior." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the silent faces of the courtroom, meeting the gaze of the people he was sworn to protect and serve. "I apologize to you, Chief Judge Smith, for my disrespectful and unprofessional conduct." His gaze then softened, looking around the room. "And I apologize to everyone present in this courtroom today. My actions were out of line, and I deeply regret causing such a disturbance and showing such disrespect." His voice cracked slightly at the end, the full weight of his apology evident in his trembling posture. It was a heartfelt admission of fault, spoken with profound remorse. Judge Smith listened to Officer Miller's apology with a steady gaze. When the officer finished, the judge's expression remained thoughtful, not harsh. He looked out at the entire courtroom, his voice calm but clear, ensuring everyone could hear his important message. "Officer Miller's apology is noted," Judge Smith stated, his voice carrying the weight of his office. "But this incident highlights a very important point for all of us here today. It does not matter if I am wearing this robe, or if I am simply a citizen with a traffic ticket. Every single person, every human being, deserves to be treated with fairness and kindness. This is not just a rule for the court, it is a rule for life." He continued, "Respect is not something that should only be given to those in positions of power. It is a basic right that should be extended to everyone, equally. When we forget that, when we allow our impatience or assumptions to guide our actions, we fail not only ourselves but the very idea of justice and community we strive to build." The judge's words were a powerful lesson, reminding everyone that true respect knows no rank or title. Having delivered his clear message about universal respect, Judge Smith then turned his attention back to Officer Miller, who was still standing rigidly, awaiting his fate. The judge's voice softened slightly, but held a firm resolve. "Officer Miller," Judge Smith stated, "your actions today were a clear departure from the standards of conduct expected of an officer of the law. This cannot be overlooked. It is vital that you, and all officers, understand the importance of treating every citizen with courtesy and professionalism, regardless of the situation." He continued, "Therefore, I am ordering that you attend a specialized training program. This program will focus on community relations, de-escalation techniques, and the fundamental principles of respectful interaction with the public. It is my hope that this will not be seen as a punishment, but as an opportunity for growth and a reminder of the true meaning of public service." Officer Miller nodded quickly, a flicker of relief mixed with continued shame in his eyes. The judge was not taking away his job, but giving him a chance to learn and do better. The message was clear: there were consequences, but also a path forward. After deciding on Officer Miller's training, Judge Smith's gaze swept across the courtroom once more. His expression was serious, yet held a hint of wisdom that seemed to invite reflection. He knew this unexpected event was a powerful teaching moment, one that could resonate far beyond the walls of Courtroom 3B. Today's events, while regrettable, offer a valuable lesson for every single person in this room, Judge Smith stated, his voice resonating with authority. It shows us that assumptions can lead to unfairness, and that quick judgments can cause harm. We must all remember to pause, to listen, and to treat each other with the same kindness we hope to receive. He continued, whether you are here as a defendant, a witness, a lawyer, or just an observer, remember the importance of patience, empathy, and respect. These are not just words, they are the building blocks of a fair society. Let us all take this experience as a reminder to practice good behavior, not just when we are being watched, but always. The judge's words settled over the room like a quiet promise, leaving everyone with a deeper understanding of how they should act. As Judge Smith finished speaking, a quiet understanding settled over the courtroom. The tension that had gripped the room slowly eased, replaced by a thoughtful atmosphere. People looked at each other, then back at the judge, a shared sense of the day's profound lesson etched on their faces. They had witnessed not just an unexpected event, but a powerful teaching on human decency. Officer Miller, still standing before the bench, no longer trembled with fear, but stood with a solemn expression, clearly internalizing the judge's words. He understood that his mistake, while serious, had been turned into a chance for everyone to learn. The courtroom attendees, who had arrived with their own worries and expectations, now left with something more important, a renewed sense of the value of respect. They knew that whether someone wore a uniform, sat on a bench, or simply came for a traffic ticket, every single person deserved to be treated with kindness and understanding. The day's events would likely be remembered not for the slap, but for the important lesson in respect that followed.